Some people mistake a badge for absolute power. They forget that real authority answers to something greater. The morning sun cast long golden lines across the entrance to Fort Ashford, one of the largest military installations in Virginia, where every vehicle rolled forward with quiet precision and every uniform represented years of discipline rather than privilege. The air carried the distant rhythm of boots on pavement, the hum of diesel engines, and the low murmur of soldiers beginning another ordinary day. Civilians passed through the outer security checkpoint while military police monitored the flow with practiced calm, their movements almost invisible against the routine that had been perfected over decades. Less than a mile from the main gate, however, another patrol vehicle sat at the edge of the highway shoulder, its emergency lights flashing softly in the crisp morning light. Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against the driver's door with the confidence of someone who had spent years believing his instincts were never wrong. He watched every passing vehicle with narrowed eyes, convinced that experience allowed him to judge people before they even spoke. When a dark gray pickup truck slowed near the intersection leading toward the installation, Brooks immediately straightened. The truck was spotless but modest, carrying no visible markings beyond a small department of defense parking decal in the lower corner of the windshield. Behind the wheel sat a middle-aged black man wearing a simple navy polo shirt, khaki pants, and a faded baseball cap. Nothing about him demanded attention, and yet something about his calm expression seemed to irritate Brooks before a single word had been exchanged. He stepped into the lane and motioned for the truck to pull over. The driver complied immediately, signaling carefully before stopping on the shoulder. There was no hesitation, no complaint, no sudden movement. The engine shut off, and both hands rested visibly on the steering wheel before Brooks even reached the driver's window. "License and registration," Brooks said without greeting. The driver nodded politely and handed over the requested documents. "Good morning, officer." Brooks barely acknowledged the greeting. His eyes scanned the identification card, then drifted back to the man's face. "Marcus Ellison," he read aloud before letting out a faint scoff. "Where are you headed?" "Fort Ashford," Marcus answered evenly. "I have business on base." "Business," Brooks repeated. "You don't exactly look like someone with military business." Marcus remained composed, his voice measured and respectful. "My destination is inside the installation, sir." Brooks looked beyond him into the cab. A neatly pressed garment bag rested across the back seat beside a leather briefcase. There were no suspicious items, no clutter, nothing that suggested urgency or disorder. Somehow that calm organization only deepened Brooks's suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus complied without argument, closing the door gently behind him. Standing a little over 6 feet tall, he carried himself with remarkable posture, the kind that came from decades of habit rather than performance. Even in casual clothes, there was an unmistakable steadiness about him. He neither challenged the officer nor attempted to explain himself further. Passing drivers slowed slightly, curious about the traffic stop unfolding so close to the military gate. Brooks circled the truck slowly, studying every detail as though determined to uncover something everyone else had missed. "What's in the briefcase?" he asked. "Work materials. Mind opening it?" Marcus met the officer's eyes for the first time. "If that's required, I'll cooperate." There was no sarcasm in his voice, only quiet confidence. Brooks interpreted that confidence differently. "You're awfully calm," he muttered. "Most people get nervous." Marcus answered with the same controlled tone. "Remaining calm usually helps everyone." Brooks frowned. He disliked the answer because it gave him nothing to challenge. He glanced toward the military installation, where the American flag moved gently in the morning breeze above the distant headquarters building. Soldiers continued their routines, unaware that the ordinary traffic stop unfolding beyond the perimeter was quietly becoming something far more significant. Brooks folded Marcus's identification card and held it in his hand instead of returning it. "You're not going anywhere until I figure out exactly who you are." Marcus looked briefly toward the entrance of Fort Ashford before returning his attention to the officer. "Officer," he said quietly, "I think you should be very careful about what happens next." Brooks laughed once, short and dismissive. "Is that supposed to impress me?" Marcus never raised his voice.
No.
It's simply advice. Neither man noticed that inside the security operations center beyond the gate, a phone had just begun to ring, or that a military police dispatcher had turned toward a monitor displaying the roadside camera nearest the installation entrance. Within moments, routine would give way to something no one standing on that quiet stretch of Virginia highway expected. Marcus Ellison stood quietly beside his truck, his hands relaxed at his sides as the cool Virginia breeze carried the distant sound of morning drills from inside Fort Ashford. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary man caught in an inconvenient traffic stop, but those who understood military life would have recognized something different in the way he carried himself. His shoulders remained level. His breathing never changed. His eyes stayed focused, without showing anger or fear. Years of service had taught him that composure often revealed more strength than raising one's voice ever could. Officer Ethan Brooks, however, saw only silence where he expected excuses. He slowly walked around the pickup for a second time, running his eyes across every inch of the vehicle. The truck was clean enough to reflect the early sunlight, its tires freshly washed, its windows clear, and its registration completely current. Nothing appeared unusual, yet Brooks continued searching as though certainty alone could create evidence. A family driving toward the installation slowed briefly before continuing through the gate. Several construction workers glanced toward the roadside before returning their attention to traffic. The scene remained calm, but curiosity had begun to spread. Brooks stopped near the driver's door and looked directly at Marcus again. "You said you have business on base. What kind of business?" Marcus answered with the same measured tone. "Professional business." Brooks folded his arms. "Professional is not an answer." Marcus gave a small nod. "It is the answer I can provide at this moment." The officer's expression hardened. He interpreted every calm response as resistance rather than discipline. "People usually become cooperative when they realize they are in trouble," he said. Marcus remained respectful. "Officer, I have cooperated with every request you have made." Brooks held up the identification card that still remained in his possession. "Not enough." He walked toward the rear of the truck and noticed a neatly folded dark green garment bag visible through the back window. "Military uniform?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Why are you not wearing it?" "Because my schedule did not require it before entering the installation." Brooks laughed softly. Convenient answer. Marcus did not react. Instead, he looked briefly toward the entrance of Fort Ashford where soldiers continued passing through the checkpoint in an orderly line. Every few moments, the distant sound of a salute echoed across the open roadway as military personnel greeted senior officers entering the base. Brooks followed Marcus's gaze and shook his head. "You seem awfully interested in what is happening over there." "I am," Marcus answered. "It is where I am expected this morning." "Expected by who?" Brooks asked immediately. Marcus paused for only a moment before answering. "The appropriate people." That response irritated Brooks even more. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think speaking in riddles makes you sound important?" Marcus looked directly at him with steady eyes.
"No, sir."
"I simply believe that respect should exist before assumptions." For the first time since the stop began, Brooks found himself without an immediate reply. The words were calm, neither confrontational nor sarcastic, yet they lingered longer than he expected. Before he could continue questioning Marcus, the radio clipped to his shoulder crackled with routine dispatch traffic. Another officer acknowledged a traffic accident several miles away. A dispatcher reported normal conditions near the county line. Nothing seemed connected to the quiet roadside conversation unfolding outside Fort Ashford. Brooks answered briefly, then clipped the radio back into place. He looked again toward the installation, unaware that inside the Military Security Operations Center, a different radio network had become noticeably more active. Two military police officers studied the roadside surveillance camera while a communications specialist quietly verified a vehicle registration number that matched an internal schedule for the morning. One officer frowned, exchanged a glance with another, and immediately reached for the secure telephone instead of the standard radio. Outside the gate, none of that activity was visible. Marcus remained standing exactly where Brooks had instructed him to stay. He never checked his watch. He never reached for his phone. He simply waited with the patience of someone completely confident that time would reveal everything that needed to be known. Brooks interpreted that patience as arrogance. "You know," he said, slipping Marcus's identification card into his notebook, "people who think they are untouchable usually discover they are not." Marcus answered almost gently, "That lesson applies to everyone, officer." At that exact moment, somewhere beyond the concrete security barriers surrounding Fort Ashford, a set of heavy steel vehicle control gates began moving into position while several military police vehicles quietly started their engines, responding not with urgency or panic, but with the disciplined precision that came only from following established protocol. The secure telephone inside the Military Security Operations Center rang only twice before it was answered. The staff sergeant listening on the other end did not interrupt, did not ask unnecessary questions, and did not waste a single second once he heard the name attached to the vehicle registration. His expression changed immediately. He thanked the caller, ended the conversation, and turned toward the duty officer overseeing the morning shift. Within moments, several quiet instructions moved across the room with practiced efficiency.
No alarm sounded.
No one rushed. Inside Fort Ashford, professionalism meant responding without creating panic. Outside the gate, Marcus Ellison remained exactly where he had been asked to stand. His attention drifted briefly toward the flag flying above headquarters, its colors moving steadily in the morning wind. For an instant, memories crossed his mind. More than 25 years earlier, he had stood beneath another American flag as a young second lieutenant taking an oath that would shape the rest of his life. He remembered long nights at officer candidate school, exhausting field exercises that tested every limit, overseas deployments that demanded calm under impossible pressure, and countless young soldiers who had looked to him for guidance during moments far more difficult than an unexpected traffic stop. Rank had never been about privilege to Marcus. It had always meant responsibility. Every promotion represented another promise to lead with integrity, to protect those under his command, and to place service before personal pride. Even after earning the Silver Eagle of a full Army colonel, he continued driving his own truck, carrying his own briefcase, and introducing himself simply as Marcus, whenever protocol allowed. Those who served beside him respected him because he never expected special treatment. Ironically, that quiet humility often caused strangers to underestimate him. Officer Ethan Brooks saw none of that history. He saw only a man who refused to become emotional under pressure, and the officer interpreted that discipline as quiet defiance. Brooks glanced once more at the identification card before slipping it back into his notebook instead of returning it. "You seem very confident that someone is going to help you," he said. Marcus answered calmly. "Confidence comes from knowing who you are, not from expecting favors." Brooks smirked. "You talk like someone who thinks the rules do not apply to him." Marcus shook his head gently. "The rules apply to everyone. That is exactly why they matter." The response frustrated Brooks because it left no room for confrontation. Several passing motorists slowed their vehicles as they noticed the patrol car parked beside the road. A retired couple heading toward the visitors' center exchanged concerned looks before continuing through the checkpoint. Nearby, two civilian contractors paused beside their pickup truck, quietly observing the conversation from a respectful distance. Nothing appeared dramatic, yet there was an unmistakable tension hanging over the roadside. Brooks walked back toward the patrol vehicle and opened the driver's door. He typed Marcus's information into the onboard computer once again, convinced that another search would uncover something different. The screen displayed a clean record. Valid identification. Valid registration.
No outstanding warrants. No alerts requiring detention.
Brooks frowned. He refreshed the search a second time with identical results. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath. Marcus remained silent. Experience had taught him that patience often revealed more than arguments ever could. A sudden vibration came from Brooks's portable radio. Instead of routine dispatch traffic, an unfamiliar transmission requested that all county units remain clear of the immediate entrance to Fort Ashford until further notice. Brooks looked toward the gate with visible confusion. At nearly the same moment, The massive steel vehicle barriers near the entrance slowly rose into place. Security personnel redirected incoming traffic with calm efficiency, while several military police vehicles rolled into carefully assigned positions. There were no flashing emergency lights, no frantic movements, only disciplined coordination that suggested every person involved understood exactly where they were supposed to be. Brooks watched the activity with growing curiosity. "What is going on over there?" he asked, almost to himself. Marcus followed his gaze for only a second before answering quietly, "I believe they are following procedure." Brooks looked sharply back at him. "How would you know that?" Marcus met his eyes without the slightest hint of triumph. "Because procedure exists for moments when assumptions become expensive." Before Brooks could respond, another military police vehicle appeared beyond the security barriers, followed by a second and then a third, each moving with deliberate precision toward the outer roadway leading directly to the traffic stop. The atmosphere changed without a single raised voice, and for the first time that morning, Officer Ethan Brooks felt something he had not expected to feel when he first stepped beside that gray pickup truck. Uncertainty. Officer Ethan Brooks watched the line of approaching military police vehicles with growing confusion. They were not moving fast, and there were no flashing emergency lights cutting through the morning air. Instead, every vehicle maintained perfect spacing, rolling forward with the quiet precision of a team following a carefully rehearsed plan. Soldiers standing near the entrance instinctively adjusted their posture as the convoy approached, while security personnel at the gate exchanged brief acknowledgments through their radios before continuing their assigned duties. Nothing about the scene suggested panic, yet everything about it signaled that something important was unfolding. Brooks folded his arms and looked back at Marcus Ellison. "Do not get any ideas," he said firmly. "This stop is not over." Marcus answered with the same calm expression he had maintained since the beginning. "I have not suggested otherwise." Brooks stepped closer. "You have been standing there like you know exactly what is about to happen." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I know that every situation eventually becomes clear." The answer irritated Brooks once again. He believed confidence should belong to the person wearing the badge, not to the man standing beside an ordinary pickup truck. "You have not answered my questions the way I wanted," Brooks continued. "You have avoided giving direct explanations, and now military vehicles are showing up. That does not look like a coincidence." Marcus remained respectful. "I answered every question truthfully. There is a difference between withholding information and speaking within the limits of what is appropriate." Brooks let out a short laugh that carried more frustration than amusement. "Appropriate according to who?" Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. "According to the responsibilities I accepted many years ago." Before Brooks could press further, the lead military police vehicle reached the entrance road and stopped briefly beside the security checkpoint. The driver spoke with the gate personnel through an open window while another officer reviewed information on a digital tablet. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds before the convoy continued moving toward the outer roadway where Brooks had conducted the stop. Several civilians waiting to enter the installation noticed the unusual activity. Some quietly stepped aside while others watched with growing curiosity. A delivery driver removed his baseball cap as he observed the military officers passing by, sensing that whatever was happening deserved quiet respect. Brooks looked toward the approaching vehicles and reached for his shoulder radio. "County Dispatch, this is Officer Brooks. Can you advise why military police are responding to my location?" There was a brief pause before the dispatcher answered. "Officer Brooks, we have been instructed to allow military authorities to coordinate activities near the installation entrance. Continue to maintain the scene." Brooks frowned. "Maintain the scene?" he repeated quietly after the transmission ended. The phrase lingered in his mind because it sounded less like support and more like preparation for something beyond his control. Marcus stood silently beside his truck, his attention focused neither on Brooks nor on the approaching convoy. Instead, he watched the American flag above Fort Ashford as it continued moving steadily in the breeze. The same flag had accompanied every chapter of his career, from his first deployment to humanitarian missions after hurricanes, from promotion ceremonies to memorial services honoring soldiers who never returned home. He understood better than most that authority carried meaning only when guided by discipline and humility. Rank could command obedience, but character earned trust. Brooks noticed the distant look in Marcus's eyes and misread it entirely. "You still think somebody important is coming for you," he said. Marcus answered softly. "I think everyone is. Simply doing the job they have been entrusted to do." "Including you?" Brooks asked. Marcus gave the slightest nod. "Especially me." The convoy finally turned onto the shoulder, less than 100 yards away. One by one, the military police vehicles came to a smooth stop without blocking traffic or creating confusion. Uniformed personnel stepped out with measured professionalism, speaking briefly among themselves before surveying the area. None of them appeared hurried. None of them appeared uncertain. Their movements reflected preparation rather than reaction. Brooks instinctively straightened his posture as one senior officer emerged from the lead vehicle carrying a folder beneath his arm. The officer looked first toward the security gate, then toward Marcus, and finally toward Brooks. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Even the passing traffic seemed quieter as the morning breeze carried only the distant cadence of soldiers marching somewhere inside Fort Ashford. The silence itself seemed to signal that the ordinary roadside stop had quietly crossed into something far more significant, and although Officer Ethan Brooks still believed he was in complete control of the situation, the balance of authority had already begun shifting in ways he had not yet realized. The senior military police officer walked forward with an unhurried confidence that immediately changed the atmosphere, without a single command being spoken. His uniform was perfectly pressed, every insignia placed with exact precision, and the expression on his face reflected years of experience handling situations where facts mattered more than assumptions. Behind him, the other military police officers quietly positioned themselves along the roadside, not surrounding anyone, not creating intimidation, but establishing an orderly perimeter that kept traffic flowing while preserving the scene. Every movement was deliberate. Every action followed procedure. Officer Ethan Brooks instinctively squared his shoulders and stepped forward before the senior officer reached him. "Can I help you?" Brooks asked in a professional tone that carried a hint of impatience. The military officer offered a courteous
Nod.
"Good morning. I am Major Daniel Foster with the United States Army Military Police Corps. We received notification regarding activity near the installation entrance." Brooks folded his arms. "Everything is under control here. Routine traffic stop." Foster glanced briefly toward Marcus Ellison before returning his attention to Brooks. "I appreciate the update." His voice remained calm and measured. "For everyone's awareness, temporary access procedures are now in effect." Brooks looked toward the entrance just as another set of reinforced security barriers completed their slow movement across the outbound lanes. Electronic signs illuminated above the roadway, redirecting civilian traffic while military personnel calmly guided drivers through alternate inspection points.
No alarm sounded. No confusión erupted.
The installation simply shifted into a higher security posture with the quiet efficiency that only disciplined organizations could achieve. Brooks frowned as he watched the barriers settle into place. "Why are the exits restricted?" Foster answered without hesitation. "Standard protocol, while a matter involving military jurisdiction is being clarified." Brooks immediately responded, "This is a county law enforcement matter." Foster nodded politely. "At the moment, we are confirming exactly which authorities are involved." The answer was respectful, yet it carried enough certainty to leave no room for argument. Marcus remained standing beside his truck exactly where he had been throughout the encounter. He made no attempt to interrupt the conversation or influence the situation. His hands rested naturally at his sides while the morning breeze gently stirred the edge of the garment bag still visible through the rear window of his pickup. A young private standing near one of the military police vehicles glanced toward Marcus for only a fraction of a second before immediately returning his eyes forward. It was a subtle gesture, almost invisible, but one shaped by instinctive military bearing. Foster noticed it without reacting. Brooks did not. Instead, Brooks reached into his notebook and held up Marcus's identification card. "This individual has been unable to provide satisfactory explanations regarding his activities." Foster extended his hand politely. May I examine the identification? Brooks hesitated for only a moment before passing it over. Foster studied the card carefully. His expression did not change, but his eyes paused ever so slightly on Marcus's full name before continuing. He quietly compared the information with the secure tablet one of his officers carried nearby. The officer gave an almost imperceptible nod. Foster returned the card without comment. Brooks interpreted the silence as agreement. Exactly, he said confidently. Something about this situation does not add up. Foster looked directly at Brooks. Sometimes appearances are incomplete until every fact has been verified. Brooks let out a restrained breath. That is precisely what I am trying to do. And that is appreciated, Foster replied. Verification protects everyone. Marcus finally spoke, his voice as calm as it had been since the beginning of the stop. Major, thank you for ensuring procedures are followed. Foster acknowledged him with the slightest inclination of his head, careful not to reveal anything further. Brooks immediately noticed the exchange. You know each other? Foster answered carefully. At this stage, I am confirming identities according to military protocol. The wording was precise, neither confirming nor denying more than necessary. Brooks glanced from Foster to Marcus and back again. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his own assumptions. He replayed the past several minutes in his mind. The spotless vehicle, the disciplined posture, the carefully chosen words, the refusal to become emotional. None of it matched the story Brooks had convinced himself was unfolding. Before he could ask another question, a secure radio on Foster's vest emitted a brief tone. Foster listened silently to the transmission through his earpiece, then looked toward the entrance of Fort Ashford. In the distance, another black government vehicle had just cleared the inner checkpoint and was heading toward the roadside under military escort. Foster calmly closed the folder beneath his arm and looked back at Brooks. Officer, I recommend that no further conclusions be reached until the next individual arrives. We are only moments away from having complete clarity. Brooks followed the approaching vehicle with his eyes as the realization slowly settled over the quiet roadside that whatever happened next would permanently redefine everything he believed he understood about the man standing patiently beside the gray pickup truck. The black government sedan moved steadily along the access road, escorted by two military police vehicles that maintained perfect formation without a single unnecessary movement. Every soldier stationed near the entrance instinctively shifted into sharper posture as the convoy approached. There were no shouted commands, no dramatic displays of authority, only the quiet discipline that defined an organization built on procedure rather than spectacle. Officer Ethan Brooks noticed the subtle change immediately. Even Major Daniel Foster adjusted his stance by a fraction, his attention fixed on the approaching vehicle with unmistakable professionalism. Brooks followed his gaze, trying to understand why a routine traffic stop had drawn this level of attention. The sedan rolled to a smooth stop several yards away. A uniformed aide stepped forward first, opening the rear passenger door before quietly stepping aside. Brooks expected a senior government official or perhaps the commanding general of Fort Ashford. Instead, no one emerged from the vehicle. The aide looked directly toward Marcus Ellison. Sir, he said respectfully, your staff has arrived. Marcus gave a small nod but remained exactly where he was standing. Thank you. Please wait one moment. The aide acknowledged the instruction without question and stepped back beside the vehicle. Brooks stared at Marcus, momentarily unable to connect what he had just witnessed. Your staff? He repeated. Marcus answered calmly. Yes. Brooks looked toward Major Foster. What exactly is going on? Foster remained composed. We are allowing the appropriate chain of command to address the situation. Brooks frowned. Chain of command? Marcus finally turned toward him. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, no desire to embarrass anyone. He simply spoke with the same steady voice he had used from the beginning. Officer Brooks, I understand you were performing your duties as you believed appropriate. I have no intention of interfering with that process. Brooks looked confused. Then why is all of this happening? Marcus paused briefly before answering. Because facts eventually arrive. At that moment, one of the officers standing beside the military police vehicles received a secure communication through his headset. He immediately approached Major Foster and quietly handed him a sealed folder. Foster opened it, carefully reviewed the contents, then closed it again with deliberate precision. He stepped toward Marcus and, without hesitation, came to full military attention. Every soldier nearby immediately mirrored the movement. The roadside became completely silent. Passing civilian drivers slowed instinctively, sensing they were witnessing something unusual even if they did not understand the reason. Brooks watched as Major Foster delivered a crisp salute. "Good morning, Colonel Ellison," he said clearly. "Welcome back to Fort Ashford, sir." Marcus returned the salute with practiced professionalism before lowering his hand. "Good morning, Major." "Thank you." For several seconds, Officer Brooks did not move. His eyes shifted from Marcus to Foster, then toward the soldiers who remained standing at attention. The simple man in the navy polo shirt, the individual Brooks had questioned for nearly an hour, was not an ordinary visitor. He was a United States Army colonel whose authority inside the installation extended far beyond anything Brooks had imagined. Marcus accepted the return of his identification card from Major Foster, who presented it respectfully with both hands. "Your schedule has been adjusted slightly, sir," Foster said. "Headquarters has been informed of the delay." Marcus accepted the card with a quiet nod. "Thank you, Major. I appreciate everyone's professionalism." Brooks slowly found his voice. "Colonel," he asked, almost whispering the word. Marcus turned toward him with exactly the same calm expression he had maintained throughout. "The encounter?" "Yes, officer." Brooks searched for something to say, but found only silence. Every assumption he had made that morning seemed to collapse under the weight of a single verified fact. He remembered dismissing Marcus's calm confidence, questioning his purpose, and interpreting dignity as defiance. Yet at no point had Marcus raised his voice, demanded recognition, or revealed his position to gain an advantage. He had simply allowed the truth to arrive on its own. Around them, the military police quietly resumed their normal duties. The security barriers remained in place only long enough to complete final verification before preparations quietly began to restore normal access. Nothing about the response suggested personal retaliation. Everything reflected procedure, accountability, and respect for established authority. Marcus looked briefly toward the entrance of Fort Ashford before returning his attention to Brooks. "Officer," he said gently, "titles matter far less than the way we choose to treat people before we know who they are." Those words settled over the roadside with far greater weight than any rank ever could, and for the first time that morning, Officer Ethan Brooks understood that the most important lesson waiting for him had never been about military authority at all. It had always been about character. For several long moments, the only sound on the roadside was the gentle rustling of the American flag above Fort Ashford and the distant cadence of soldiers continuing their morning exercises. Life inside the installation moved forward with remarkable consistency, reminding everyone present that institutions built on discipline did not pause because of one unexpected encounter. Officer Ethan Brooks remained motionless, his thoughts racing as the realization settled deeper with every passing second. He had spent nearly an hour convinced that he understood the situation completely. Now he recognized how little he had actually known. Major Daniel Foster lowered his salute and immediately shifted into the next phase of military procedure. He spoke quietly with another military police officer, who began documenting the timeline of the morning's events on a secure tablet. Another officer verified the roadside camera coverage, while a communications specialist confirmed radio logs from both military and county channels. Every action followed established protocol. There were no raised voices, no accusations, and no celebration. The objective was simple: establish the facts, preserve the record, and allow every agency to fulfill its responsibilities with professionalism. Marcus Ellison watched the process without interruption. He had participated in countless official reviews throughout his military career, and he understood that accountability depended upon complete and accurate information rather than emotion. His calm expression never changed. He neither hurried the investigation nor attempted to influence it. Instead, he stood quietly beside his pickup truck, allowing every person present to perform the duties entrusted to them. Brooks finally broke the silence. "Major Foster," he said carefully. Am I being investigated? Foster answered with measured respect. Officer Brooks, at this stage we are documenting an interaction that occurred immediately outside a secure military installation. The purpose is fact-finding. Every agency involved deserves an accurate record. Brooks nodded slowly. The answer was fair, yet it carried enough weight to remind him that documentation often spoke louder than personal explanations. A county sheriff's supervisor arrived a few minutes later after receiving notification from dispatch. Sheriff Linda Harper stepped out of her vehicle, greeted Major Foster with professional courtesy, and then approached Brooks. "Good morning, officer," she said evenly. "I understand there has been an unusual situation." Brooks gave a restrained nod. "Yes, ma'am." Harper accepted a brief summary from Foster before requesting Brooks's account of the encounter. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes while comparing his statement with the preliminary timeline already assembled by the military police. When Brooks finished speaking, Harper thanked him and turned toward Marcus. "Colonel Ellison," she said respectfully, "would you be willing to provide your account as well?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." His explanation was remarkably brief. He described the traffic stop exactly as it had occurred, answered each question directly, and deliberately avoided speculation about anyone's motives. He repeated only the facts he had personally observed. Harper noticed what everyone else was beginning to recognize. Marcus never exaggerated. He never attempted to embarrass Brooks. Even now, with his rank fully acknowledged, he refused to use authority as a weapon. When the interview concluded, Harper quietly closed her notebook. "Thank you, Colonel. Your cooperation is appreciated." Marcus offered a small smile. Professionalism is easier when everyone is committed to the truth. Those words lingered in the cool morning air. Several younger military police officers exchanged thoughtful glances, recognizing that they were witnessing a lesson far more valuable than anything written in a training manual. Leadership was not demonstrated through power alone. It was revealed through restraint when power was available. Harper stepped aside with Foster for a brief discussion before returning to Brooks. "Officer," she said calmly, "there will be an administrative review of today's contact, consistent with department policy. Until that process is complete, we simply ask for your full cooperation." Brooks answered quietly, "You will have it." His confidence had been replaced by reflection. Looking toward Marcus, he remembered every assumption he had made before asking a single meaningful question. He realized that nothing about Marcus's appearance had ever justified the conclusions he had reached. The mistake had not been procedural alone. It had begun much earlier, in the silent judgments formed before facts had been gathered. Marcus picked up his leather briefcase and prepared to continue toward headquarters. Before leaving, he looked once more at Brooks. "Officer," he said with quiet sincerity, "every person you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. The strongest professionals never allow assumptions to write that story for them." Brooks lowered his eyes briefly before looking back up. This time he truly listened. As the military police escort prepared to accompany Colonel Marcus Ellison through the gates of Fort Ashford, the morning sun climbed higher over the installation, illuminating the same flag that had watched generations of Americans serve with honor, reminding everyone present that respect earned through character would always outlast authority claimed through position alone. Colonel Marcus Ellison entered Fort Ashford with the same quiet composure that had defined every moment of the morning, yet the events outside the gate continued to echo far beyond the checkpoint itself. Inside headquarters, the scheduled leadership briefing had already been delayed by several minutes. Senior officers gathered around the conference table noticed the empty chair reserved for Marcus, something that almost never happened. His reputation throughout the installation was built on consistency. He always arrived early. He always came prepared. He never allowed personal inconvenience to interfere with professional responsibility. When the conference room doors finally opened, every conversation stopped. Marcus stepped inside carrying the same leather briefcase he had held throughout the morning. Major Daniel Foster entered behind him and quietly approached the commanding general before handing over a sealed folder containing the preliminary report. The general reviewed only the first page before looking toward Marcus with visible concern. "Colonel, are you all right?" Marcus gave a respectful nod. "Yes, sir. Everything has been resolved professionally." The general closed the folder without another question. "Then we will continue the meeting after the appropriate reviews are completed." Marcus took his seat without mentioning his rank, without describing the roadside encounter, and without seeking sympathy from anyone in the room. His focus returned immediately to the operational briefing scheduled for that morning. Outside headquarters, however, the review had already begun. Sheriff Linda Harper and Major Foster met inside the installation's Joint Coordination Office, where representatives from both agencies examined body camera footage, radio communications, dispatch records, and security camera recordings from the entrance roadway. Every minute of the encounter was carefully reconstructed in chronological order. No one searched for excuses. No one searched for someone to blame before the facts had been fully examined. The purpose was accountability supported by evidence. As the recordings played across the monitor, the room remained unusually quiet. The video showed Marcus immediately complying with every instruction. It showed him speaking respectfully throughout the encounter. It also showed multiple opportunities when assumptions appeared to influence the direction of the stop before additional information had been gathered. Harper watched carefully before placing her pen on the table. "Professional conduct requires impartial judgment from the very beginning," she said calmly. Foster nodded. "That standard protects both officers and citizens." Neither statement carried anger. Both reflected the principle that trust depended upon fairness rather than appearance. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Brooks sat alone inside a conference room at the county sheriff's office completing his written statement. The silence surrounding him felt far louder than any conversation from earlier that morning. For the first time in years, he replayed not only what he had said, but why he had chosen to say it. The questions that now occupied his thoughts had nothing to do with Marcus's rank. They centered on something far more difficult. Would he have approached the situation differently if the driver had looked different from the very beginning? The answer refused to leave his mind. Every page of the report forced him to confront moments where assumptions had quietly replaced curiosity. The realization was uncomfortable, yet impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Harper entered the room and took a seat across from him. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him of intentional wrongdoing. Instead, she placed the completed timeline between them. "Ethan," she said quietly, "every officer makes decisions under pressure. Good officers learn from mistakes. Great officers examine the beliefs that created those mistakes in the first place." Brooks looked down at the report. "I believed I was protecting the public." Harper nodded. "Intent matters. So does impact. Professionalism demands that both receive honest examination." Those words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. Back at Fort Ashford, Colonel Ellison completed the remainder of his day exactly as scheduled. He inspected training facilities, met with junior officers, and spent extra time mentoring a newly promoted captain preparing for increased responsibility. Not once did he mention the roadside incident unless directly asked. When one young lieutenant quietly expressed frustration over what had happened, Marcus offered only a gentle smile. "Your reputation is built less by the unfair moments you experience than by the character you display while moving through them." The lieutenant never forgot those words. As evening settled across the installation, the final rays of sunlight reflected from the rows of American flags lining the main boulevard. Soldiers continued changing shifts, families returned home after another ordinary day, and the gate where everything had begun resumed its familiar rhythm. To most people passing through, nothing appeared different. Yet for everyone directly involved, the events of that single morning had quietly reshaped their understanding of leadership, responsibility, and the invisible cost of judging another human being before the truth had been given the chance to speak. Several weeks passed before the final administrative reviews reached their conclusion, yet for Colonel Marcus Ellison, life continued according to the same principles that had guided him throughout his career. He arrived before sunrise, greeted young soldiers by name, listened more than he spoke, and reminded every officer under his command that leadership was measured in daily choices rather than extraordinary moments. The roadside encounter gradually became another closed file within official records, but its deeper lesson continued spreading through conversations inside briefing rooms, training classrooms, and leadership seminars across Fort Ashford. Instructors began using the incident as an example of why patience, professionalism, and impartial judgment formed the foundation of public trust. They never focused on embarrassment. They focused on growth. Sheriff Linda Harper reached a similar conclusion within her own department. During the next monthly training session, she addressed a room filled with deputies and patrol officers. She did not mention names. She did not single out individuals. Instead, she asked a simple question. How many opportunities do we lose when we decide who someone is before we discover who they actually are? The room remained silent because every experienced officer understood the weight of the question. Harper continued, reminding them that every traffic stop, every conversation, and every decision represented an opportunity either to strengthen public confidence or weaken it. Respect, she explained, should never depend upon appearance, occupation, neighborhood, or first impressions. It should be the starting point for every encounter. Officer Ethan Brooks listened carefully from the back of the room. The weeks following the incident had been difficult, filled with self-examination, additional professional training, and many honest conversations with supervisors who challenged him to think beyond procedures alone. He realized that accountability was not the end of a career. Sometimes it became the beginning of becoming the professional a community truly deserved. Months later, fate quietly arranged another meeting neither man had expected. During a regional Veterans Appreciation ceremony held at the County Civic Center, Brooks was assigned to assist with traffic coordination outside the event. Families gathered beneath rows of American flags while military bands performed familiar marches that echoed across the open plaza. Veterans from every generation greeted one another with warm smiles, shared stories, and quiet pride. As guests entered the building, Brooks noticed a familiar gray pickup truck pulling into the reserved parking area. Colonel Marcus Ellison stepped out wearing his full Army dress uniform, the silver eagle on his shoulders reflecting the afternoon sunlight. This time, there could be no misunderstanding about who he was. Brooks walked toward him, removed his hat respectfully, and spoke before Marcus had the chance to recognize him. "Colonel Ellison," he said sincerely, "I owe you something that should have been said a long time ago. I am sorry for the assumptions I made that day. You showed me more professionalism than I showed you, and I have thought about that every day since." Marcus looked at him for a moment before offering the same calm smile that had never disappeared, even during the most uncomfortable moments of their first meeting. "Officer Brooks," he replied gently, "the strongest people are not the ones who never make mistakes. They are the ones willing to learn from them." Brooks nodded quietly. "I am trying." Marcus extended his hand without hesitation. Brooks accepted it, not as a gesture of victory or defeat, but as one professional acknowledging another's commitment to becoming better. Nearby, several young cadets watched the brief exchange, without knowing the history behind it. To them, it was simply two men greeting each other with mutual respect. Perhaps that was exactly how Marcus wanted it remembered. As the ceremony began, the national anthem drifted across the Civic Center, and hundreds of people stood together beneath the same flag that had witnessed every chapter of the story. Soldiers, officers, veterans, families, and children all looked toward it from different walks of life, yet united by the hope that the ideals it represented would always be greater than personal prejudice or misplaced pride. Marcus quietly took his place among fellow service members while Brooks returned to his assigned post, carrying with him a lesson that no academy textbook alone could have taught. Real authority was never proven by how quickly someone could exercise power over another person. It was revealed by the wisdom to treat every stranger with dignity before knowing their title, their history, or the uniform they might one day remove. Because badges can be issued, ranks can be earned, and positions can change, but character is the only authority that remains when every symbol of power has been set aside.